Get out. We don't serve your kind here. These words, spoken by a luxury store owner to a black customer, sparked a chain of events that would change lives forever. But what the racist owner didn't know was that the man he just kicked out wasn't just any customer. He was the store's true owner, and he was about to teach everyone a lesson they'd never forget. Taking a deep breath, John grasped the handle and pulled. The door swung open smoothly, and a gentle chime announced his arrival. The familiar scent of leather and perfume washed over him as he stepped inside, momentarily grounding him. This was his store, his creation. Yet as heads turned to observe the newcomer, John felt the atmosphere shift subtly. The bright smiles that usually greeted customers dimmed slightly. A sales associate who had been eagerly approaching a well-heeled couple suddenly changed course, heading towards John with a look of forced politeness. The security guard from outside had followed him in, positioning himself nearby with an air of casual vigilance. As John moved further into the store, he could feel eyes following him. Whispers drifted just beyond the edge of hearing, and he caught glimpses of meaningful glances exchanged between staff members. The opulent surroundings that usually filled him with pride now felt oppressive, highlighting the gulf between his true status and his current appearance. With a sinking feeling, John realized that his experiment was already yielding results, and they were far from what he had hoped. The welcoming atmosphere he had worked so hard to cultivate seemed to evaporate in the face of his casual attire and brown skin. It was as if he had stepped into a parallel universe, one where his achievements and position meant nothing in the face of ingrained prejudice. As he pretended to browse a display of watches, each worth more than a year's salary for most Americans, John's mind raced. How deep did this bias run? Was it limited to a few individuals, or was it a systemic issue that had flourished under his nose? And most importantly, what was he going to do about it? Little did the staff know that their every action, every subtle slight and sideways glance, was being carefully noted by the very man they sought to impress. John Bennett, disguised as an ordinary black man in a luxury store, was about to uncover truths that would shake the foundations of his company and challenge the very notion of progress in American society. In the world of luxury retail, appearances are everything. But what happens when those appearances are deceiving? As store manager Richard Coleman locked eyes with John, neither man realized they were about to engage in a high-stakes game of perception and prejudice, with consequences that would ripple far beyond the confines of the store. Richard's gaze swept over John's casual attire, his lips tightening into a thin line. The warmth that usually radiated from his demeanor when greeting customers evaporated, replaced by a palpable chill. He approached John with measured steps, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor like a metronome counting down to confrontation. "Can I help you, sir?" Richard's voice dripped with feigned politeness, barely masking the suspicion lurking beneath. His eyes darted to the security guard, a subtle nod exchanged between them. John felt his heart rate quicken, a mix of indignation and disbelief coursing through him. He had anticipated some level of bias, but the blatant hostility caught him off guard. For a moment he considered revealing his true identity, imagining the shock that would spread across Richard's face. But a deeper instinct held him back. This was an opportunity to truly understand the depth of the problem. "I'm just browsing, thank you," John replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. He turned back to the display case, running his fingers along the edge as he examined a particularly exquisite timepiece. Richard hovered uncomfortably close, his presence a constant reminder of unwelcome scrutiny. "These are very high-end pieces," he said, his tone laced with condescension. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable looking at our more accessible collection?" The implication hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. John's fingers clenched involuntarily, his knuckles whitening with the effort of restraining his anger. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain in character. "Actually, I'm quite interested in this one," John said, pointing to a watch that he knew cost more than most people's annual salary. "Could I take a closer look?" Richard's face tightened, a flicker of panic crossing his features. "I'm afraid that's not possible, sir. These watches are meant for our high-end customers. We don't usually keep this kind of merchandise out for just anyone to touch." The words struck John like physical blows. Each syllable peeled back layers of civility, revealing the ugly truth beneath. This was no isolated incident, no momentary lapse in judgment. This was systemic, ingrained prejudice playing out before his eyes. John's mind raced, weighing his options. He could end this charade now, watch as Richard's world crumbled around him when he realized his grievous error. But what would that accomplish? One man humbled, perhaps, but the larger problem would remain unaddressed. No, John decided. He needed to see this through to its bitter end. Only by experiencing the full brunt of discrimination could he truly understand the changes that needed to be made. I assure you, I'm quite capable of affording this watch, John said, injecting a note of steel into his voice. I'd like to try it on, please. Richard's facade of politeness cracked, revealing the ugly prejudice beneath. Look, he said, leaning in close, his voice low and menacing. I think it's best if you leave now. We have a certain image to maintain, and frankly, you don't fit it. There are other stores that might be more suitable for someone like you. The words hung in the air, sharp and venomous. John felt a surge of rage threatening to overwhelm him. Years of hard work, of breaking barriers and shattering stereotypes, and yet here he stood, judged solely by the color of his skin and the cut of his clothes. For a moment, John teetered on the brink of revelation. One word from him could bring this entire charade crashing down. But as he looked into Richard's eyes, seeing not just prejudice, but a deep-seated fear and ignorance, he knew that the time wasn't right. This wasn't just about one man or one store. This was a symptom of a much larger problem, one that required a more comprehensive solution. With a Herculean effort, John swallowed his anger and nodded curtly. I see, he said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. Thank you for your time. As John turned to leave, he caught sight of his reflection in a nearby mirror. The man staring back at him wasn't the powerful CEO, the respected businessman, the force for change he had worked so hard to become. In that moment, he was just another black man, deemed unworthy of respect or consideration. The realization hit him like a physical blow, reigniting his determination. This wasn't the end, he vowed silently. This was just the beginning. As he pushed through the doors and stepped back onto the busy New York street, John's mind was already racing, formulating plans for a reckoning that would shake the foundations of not just this store, but the entire industry. Richard Coleman watched John leave, a self-satisfied smirk playing across his lips. Little did he know that his actions today had set in motion a chain of events that would soon come crashing down around him, forever changing the landscape of luxury retail and exposing the insidious nature of prejudice that lurked beneath its glittering surface. As the door closed behind John, Richard's smirk faded, replaced by a gnawing unease he couldn't quite place. What would unfold in the next few moments would shatter not just Richard's complacency, but the very foundations of luxury retail's long-held prejudices. John's eyes locked onto a timepiece that gleamed under the soft lighting of the display case. Its intricate dial and precious metal construction spoke of craftsmanship beyond compare. He knew without asking that this was no ordinary watch. It was a symbol of exclusivity, a $122,000 limited edition masterpiece that represented the pinnacle of horological artistry. I'd like to see that one, John said, his voice steady as he pointed to the watch. Richard's eyebrows shot up, disbelief etched across his features. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words, as if the very notion of John being interested in such a piece was beyond comprehension. Sir, Richard began, his tone dripping with thinly veiled contempt, that particular timepiece is quite exclusive. Perhaps I could show you something more suited to your tastes. The implication hung heavy in the air, an almost tangible barrier between John and the object of his interest. John felt a surge of anger rising within him, threatening to break through his carefully maintained composure. He pushed it down, determined to see this encounter through to its bitter end. I'm quite aware of its exclusivity, he replied, meeting Richard's gaze unflinchingly, and I'd very much like to try it on. Richard's reluctance was palpable, his body language screaming discomfort as he glanced between John and the watch. I'm not sure that would be appropriate, he said, his words carefully measured. "We have strict policies regarding our high-value merchandise." The tension in the air thickened, a palpable force that seemed to push against John's chest. He could feel the eyes of other staff members and customers upon him, a silent audience to this unfolding drama. His frustration grew with each passing second, a mix of anger at Richard's blatant discrimination and disbelief that such prejudice could exist so openly in a store he owned. "I assure you," John said, his voice low and controlled, "I am more than capable of handling such a piece. I would appreciate the opportunity to examine it more closely." He held out his hand, a simple gesture that carried the weight of a challenge. Would Richard dare to refuse him outright? The store manager's face contorted, a war between his ingrained prejudices and the potential of a high-value sale playing out across his features. For a moment, it seemed he might relent, but then his expression hardened, resolve settling in his eyes like a steel shutter coming down. "I'm sorry, sir," Richard said, his tone devoid of any real apology, "but we can't just let anyone handle our merchandise. It's store policy. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The words hung in the air, sharp and final, a clear dismissal based on nothing more than appearance and prejudice. John felt as if he had been struck. The blatant discrimination, now laid bare without any pretense of politeness, was a stinging slap to his face. Years of success, of breaking barriers and shattering stereotypes, seemed to crumble in the face of such entrenched bigotry. For a fleeting moment, he considered revealing his true identity, imagining the shock and horror that would spread across Richard's face. But a deeper instinct held him back. This wasn't just about one man or one store. It was a symptom of a much larger problem, one that required a more comprehensive solution. With a Herculean effort, John swallowed his anger and nodded curtly. "I see," he said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Thank you for making your position so abundantly clear." Without another word, he turned and walked towards the exit, his steps measured and deliberate. As John pushed through the doors and stepped back onto the busy New York street, a maelstrom of emotions swirled within him. Anger burned hot in his chest, threatening to consume him. But alongside it, a steely determination began to take root. This encounter had opened his eyes to a reality he could no longer ignore. He paused on the sidewalk, the bustling city continuing its frantic pace around him. In that moment, John made a silent vow. This wouldn't be the end. It was just the beginning. The luxury retail industry, with its gilded facades and hidden prejudices, was about to face a reckoning, and John Bennett would be the catalyst for change, no matter the cost. John's fingers tightened around the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white with suppressed rage. But beneath the anger, a spark of inspiration ignited. How could he transform this personal slight into a catalyst for industry-wide change? The answer, he realized, lay in strategic patience and meticulous planning. As the bustling city life continued around his parked car, John's mind raced through the encounter he'd just experienced. The cold stares, the condescending tone, the outright refusal of service. Each moment replayed in vivid detail, stoking the fire of his determination. He had built an empire on the principles of equality and respect. Yet here, in his own store, those values had crumbled in the face of deep-seated prejudice. John closed his eyes, memories of past discriminations flooding back. The sidelong glances in high-end restaurants, the random security checks at airports, the hesitation of realtors when he inquired about penthouses. Each incident, no matter how subtle, had left its mark. But this blatant rejection in a store he owned, felt like a tipping point. For a moment, John entertained the idea of storming back into the store, revealing his true identity and watching Richard's world implode. The thought brought a grim satisfaction, but he quickly dismissed it. Such an action might bring personal vindication, but it would do little to address the systemic issues at play. No, this situation called for a more nuanced approach. John's years in the business world had taught him the value of gathering evidence, of building an irrefutable case before taking action. He couldn't risk Richard or others dismissing this as an isolated incident. He needed to expose the full extent of the problem. A plan began to take shape in John's mind. He would return to the store, still in disguise, but this time armed with a keener eye and a specific purpose. He would observe Richard's interactions with other customers, document any patterns of discrimination, and gather concrete evidence of the store's toxic culture. The anticipation of uncovering the truth sent a shiver down John's spine. He knew that what he might discover could be painful, perhaps even shaking his faith in the company he had built. But the potential for real, lasting change outweighed any personal discomfort. John reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen for a moment before he made the call. "Sarah," he said when his assistant answered, "I need you to clear my schedule for the next few days. Something's come up that requires my immediate attention." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "And I need you to quietly put together a team. Legal, HR, our diversity consultants. Tell them to be ready, but keep this confidential for now." As he ended the call, John felt a weight settle on his shoulders. The path ahead would not be easy, but he was no stranger to challenges. He had built his empire by confronting obstacles head-on, by refusing to accept the status quo. Now he would apply that same determination to rooting out the cancer of discrimination that had taken hold in his company. Tomorrow he would return to the store, a silent observer in a world that had rejected him. He would watch, listen, and document. And when the time was right, when he had gathered incontrovertible evidence of the systemic bias at play, he would act. Not just for himself, but for every person who had ever felt the sting of prejudice in a world that should have welcomed them. As John started his car, a grim smile played across his lips. Richard Coleman and others like him had no idea what was coming. The luxury retail industry was about to face a reckoning, and John Bennett would be the catalyst for change. The game of perception and prejudice that had begun in that store was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The luxury store's polished facade gleamed in the morning light, but John knew its pristine appearance masked an ugly truth. As he approached the entrance, heart pounding, he wondered, would today's undercover mission reveal the full extent of the store's systemic racism, or was yesterday's incident just the tip of the iceberg? John took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He pushed open the heavy glass door, the familiar chime announcing his arrival. The opulent interior, with its gleaming display cases and soft lighting, seemed to mock the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. As John moved through the store, he carefully observed the interactions around him. Richard Coleman, the manager who had so blatantly discriminated against him yesterday, was engaged in animated conversation with a well-dressed white couple. His demeanor was a stark contrast to the cold disdain he had shown John. Richard's smile was warm, his gestures welcoming, as he guided the couple towards a selection of high-end watches. The disparity in treatment was jarring, but not unexpected. John's trained eye caught the subtle shifts in Richard's body language as different customers entered the store. When a group of young black men walked in, Richard's posture stiffened, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. He made no move to approach them, instead whispering something to a nearby security guard. John's stomach churned with disgust as he watched the guard subtly position himself closer to the group. The young men, oblivious to the scrutiny, browsed the displays with excitement. Their enthusiasm was palpable, a stark contrast to the cloud of suspicion that seemed to hover over them. As John continued his covert observation, he overheard snippets of conversation that made his blood boil. Richard pulled a sales associate aside, his voice low but clear enough for John to catch the words. "Keep an eye on those guys," Richard muttered, nodding towards the group of black men. "You know how they are." The casual racism of the statement hit John like a physical blow. He clenched his fists, fighting the urge to confront Richard then and there. But he knew that a hasty confrontation would accomplish little. He needed to gather more evidence, to build an irrefutable case that would expose the systemic nature of the discrimination. Throughout the morning, John witnessed a pattern emerging. Customers of color were consistently met with colder receptions, subjected to increased surveillance, and offered less assistance than their white counterparts. The prejudice was subtle at times, blatant at others, but always present. A well-dressed black woman entered the store, her poise and elegance unmistakable. John watched as Richard approached her, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Can I help you find something?" Richard asked, his tone lacking the warmth he had shown to white customers. "We have some lovely costume jewelry that might interest you." The woman's expression flickered with hurt and indignation. "Actually," she replied, her voice steady, "I was interested in your collection of diamond necklaces." Richard's surprise was evident, and John felt a mix of satisfaction and anger as the manager fumbled to adjust his approach. As the hours passed, John's disgust grew. He had known prejudice existed in his store, but seeing it play out so consistently, so systematically, was devastating. This wasn't just one bad employee or an isolated incident. It was a culture of discrimination that had taken root in the very foundation of his business. Several times throughout the day, John found himself on the verge of revealing his true identity. The urge to confront Richard, to put an immediate stop to the bigotry he was witnessing, was almost overwhelming. But each time, he forced himself to stay silent, to continue observing and gathering evidence. As closing time approached, John made his way towards the exit, his mind racing with plans for change. He had seen enough to know that a complete overhaul was necessary. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with a simple reprimand or even by firing Richard. It required a fundamental shift in culture, training, and accountability. John slipped out of the store unnoticed, the weight of what he had witnessed heavy on his shoulders. But alongside the disgust and anger, a fierce determination burned within him. He had built this company from the ground up, and he would not allow it to become a bastion of prejudice and discrimination. As he walked away from the store, John's resolve hardened. He would use every resource at his disposal to root out this cancer of racism. The luxury retail industry was long overdue for a reckoning, and John Bennett was prepared to be the catalyst for that change. The transformation wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary, and it would start tomorrow. As dawn broke, John's car pulled into the parking lot of his company headquarters. The weight of yesterday's revelations pressed heavily on his shoulders, but a fire burned in his eyes. What would unfold in the next few hours would send shockwaves through the entire organization. How far was John willing to go to dismantle the systemic racism he'd uncovered? John strode through the pristine halls of corporate power, each step bringing him closer to a confrontation that would alter the course of his company forever. The executive team awaited, unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. As he entered the conference room, the usual greetings died on his colleagues' lips. They sensed the gravity in John's demeanor, the tension radiating from his very being. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," John began, his voice steady but filled with barely contained emotion. "What I'm about to share will shake the foundations of everything we've built." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "Yesterday, I went undercover in one of our stores. What I witnessed was nothing short of blatant racial discrimination." A collective gasp filled the room. Shock and disbelief painted the faces of his executive team. John recounted his experience in vivid detail: the cold stares, the condescending remarks, the outright refusal of service. With each word, the atmosphere in the room grew heavier, charged with a mixture of horror and shame. "This isn't an isolated incident," John continued, his voice rising with passion. "It's symptomatic of a deeper problem within our organization, a problem we can no longer ignore or sweep under the rug." The room erupted into a flurry of questions and exclamations. Legal concerns, PR nightmares, and potential backlash were all thrown into the mix. The head of human resources, Sarah, spoke up first. "John, we need to approach this carefully. Firing employees for discriminatory behavior can have significant legal implications. We need to ensure we have documented evidence and follow proper procedures." John nodded, acknowledging the validity of her concerns. "You're right, Sarah. That's why I went back today, gathering more evidence. We have a clear pattern of behavior, not just from one individual, but ingrained in the very culture of the store." The chief legal officer, Mark, leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We'll need to consult with outside counsel on this. The potential for wrongful termination lawsuits is high, especially if we move too quickly." As the debate raged on, John felt his resolve hardening. He understood the concerns of his team, the potential risks to the company they had all worked so hard to build. But he also knew that the cost of inaction was far greater than any legal or financial repercussions they might face. "I hear your concerns," John said, his voice cutting through the clamor. "But we cannot let fear of lawsuits or bad press stop us from doing what's right. We have an opportunity here, no, an obligation, to set an example for the entire industry." John outlined his plan, his words painting a vision of sweeping change. It wasn't just about firing Richard or retraining staff. It was about a fundamental shift in company culture, a commitment to diversity and inclusion that would permeate every level of the organization. "We'll implement comprehensive training programs focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion," John declared. "We'll establish clear policies for reporting and addressing discrimination. And yes, we will hold those responsible accountable for their actions." The room fell silent as John's words sank in. The enormity of the task ahead was daunting, but there was also a palpable sense of purpose in the air. This was why they had joined John's company in the first place, to make a difference, to be a force for positive change in the world. One by one, the executive team voiced their support. They recognized the challenges ahead, but were united in their commitment to John's vision. As the meeting drew to a close, a sense of anticipation filled the room. They were standing on the precipice of something momentous, a transformation that would ripple far beyond the walls of their company. As his team filed out, energized and determined, John remained in the conference room. He stared out the window at the city below, his mind already racing with the next steps. The confrontation with Richard loomed large in his thoughts. It would be a defining moment, not just for Richard and the store, but for John himself and the entire company. The storm was gathering, and John Bennett was prepared to weather it. He knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready to face them head-on. The luxury retail industry was about to experience a seismic shift, and it would start right here, with one man's unwavering commitment to justice and equality. While Richard Coleman's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on his desk, his phone suddenly erupted with a shrill ring. The caller ID flashed, "Corporate Office," and a smug smile spread across his face. This was the call he'd been waiting for, surely a commendation for his stellar management of the luxury store. He answered with practiced charm, his voice oozing confidence. "Mr. Coleman, your presence is required at headquarters immediately." The terse tone caught Richard off guard, but he quickly dismissed his unease. Probably just some stuffy executive having a bad day, he thought. As his town car wound through the bustling streets of New York, Richard's mind raced with possibilities. Perhaps a promotion was in order. He'd always fancied himself in a corner office, overseeing multiple stores. The sleek glass tower of corporate headquarters loomed before him, its imposing facade reflecting the afternoon sun. Richard strode into the lobby, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. The usual bustle of activity seemed muted, an undercurrent of tension permeating the air. The receptionist's smile felt forced as she directed him to the executive floor. In the elevator, Richard caught his reflection in the mirrored walls. He straightened his tie, smoothed back his hair, and plastered on his most winning smile. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a corridor lined with frosted glass offices. Richard's confident stride faltered as he noticed the furtive glances and hushed whispers of staff members. A knot of unease began to form in the pit of his stomach. This didn't feel like the prelude to a celebration. A stern-faced assistant led Richard to a conference room, her clipped tone betraying nothing of the purpose behind the summons. As the door closed behind him, Richard found himself alone in the cavernous space. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rapid thudding of his heart. Minutes stretched into an eternity as Richard waited. His initial bravado crumbled with each passing second. He loosened his tie, suddenly feeling constricted. What if this wasn't about a promotion at all? His mind raced through recent interactions, searching for any misstep that could have warranted such an ominous meeting. The click of the door handle shattered the silence. Richard's head snapped up, his eyes widening in shock as John Bennett strode into the room. Not the affable, distant figure from company newsletters, but a man radiating barely contained fury. Recognition dawned on Richard's face, followed swiftly by horror as the pieces fell into place. The man he had so callously dismissed from the store, the man he had treated with such blatant discrimination, was none other than the CEO of the entire company. Richard's face drained of color, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. John's gaze bored into Richard, a mix of disappointment and cold anger evident in his eyes. "Mr. Coleman," he began, his voice low and controlled, "I believe we have some matters to discuss regarding the operations of your store." Richard's mouth opened and closed, words failing him as the full weight of his actions crashed down upon him. The realization that his prejudiced behavior had been witnessed firsthand by the very top of the corporate ladder sent waves of panic coursing through his body. John took a seat across from Richard, his posture radiating authority. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about the culture you fostered in my store," he continued, emphasizing the word "me" with unmistakable ownership. As John began to recount the events of the past few days, Richard felt the ground shift beneath his feet. His career, his reputation, everything he had worked for, it all hung by a thread. And that thread was firmly in the hands of the man he had so grievously underestimated and mistreated. The conference room, once a symbol of Richard's ambitions, now felt like a cage closing in around him. As John's words washed over him, detailing the systemic discrimination he had witnessed, Richard realized that this was more than just a reprimand. This was a reckoning, and he was woefully unprepared for the storm that was about to break. The storm broke with the force of a hurricane. John's voice cut through the tension like a knife, each word a blow to Richard's crumbling facade. "Mr. Coleman, do you truly believe that discrimination preserves our brand?" The question hung in the air, a challenge that would reshape both their futures. Richard's eyes darted frantically around the conference room, seeking an escape that didn't exist. The polished wood of the table before him reflected his pale, drawn face, a stark contrast to John's resolute expression. As John began to recount his experiences in the store, his voice remained eerily calm, each word laced with barely contained fury. "I witnessed firsthand the cold stares, the condescending remarks, the outright refusal of service," John said, his gaze never wavering from Richard's face. "But what truly disturbs me is that this wasn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern, Mr. Coleman, a pattern you fostered and allowed to flourish under your leadership." Richard's mind raced, desperately grasping for excuses, justifications, anything to explain away his actions. "Mr. Bennett, I assure you, there must be some misunderstanding. We have strict policies in place." John cut him off, his voice sharp. "Policies mean nothing if they're not enforced, Mr. Coleman. And based on what I've seen, they're not just unenforced, they're actively ignored." The CEO reached into a folder, pulling out a stack of papers. Richard's stomach churned as he recognized customer complaints, employee reports, and surveillance footage stills. John laid them out one by one, building an irrefutable case of systemic discrimination. "Your treatment of customers of color has been consistently abysmal," John continued, his voice rising slightly. "Increased surveillance, condescending service, outright refusals to assist. And it's not just customers. Your hiring practices, your treatment of minority employees, it all paints a disturbing picture, Mr. Coleman." Richard's demeanor shifted from defensive to desperate. Sweat beaded on his forehead as the full weight of his actions crashed down upon him. "Mr. Bennett, please, I can explain. We've been under pressure to maintain a certain image, to cater to our high-end clientele." "Stop!" John's voice was ice. "Do not sit there and try to justify racism as a business strategy. It's not just morally reprehensible, it's antithetical to everything this company stands for." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Richard's breath came in short, panicked gasps as he realized the gravity of his situation. This wasn't just a reprimand. This was something far more severe. John leaned forward, his eyes boring into Richard's. "Mr. Coleman, I built this company on principles of inclusivity and respect. I've worked my entire life to break down barriers, to prove that luxury and diversity are not mutually exclusive. And you," he paused, disgust evident in his voice, "you've taken everything I've built and twisted it into a bastion of bigotry." Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He knew with sickening certainty that his fate was sealed. "I've heard enough," John said, his tone final. Richard Coleman, your employment with this company is terminated, effective immediately. Your franchise agreement is revoked. You will leave this building today and you will not return. The words hit Richard like physical blows. His world, so carefully constructed on a foundation of prejudice and false superiority, crumbled around him. Years of hard work, his reputation in the industry, his future prospects, all gone in an instant. But, but you can't do this, Richard stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I've given years to this company. I've made you millions. At the cost of our integrity, John interrupted. At the cost of basic human decency. No amount of profit is worth that, Mr. Coleman. I would rather shutter every store we own than allow this kind of discrimination to continue. Richard slumped in his chair, defeated. The reality of his situation washed over him in waves of despair. He had lost everything: his job, his status, his future in the industry. And for what? The hollow satisfaction of wielding power over others based on nothing more than the color of their skin. As security arrived to escort Richard from the building, John's final words echoed in his ears. Remember this moment, Mr. Coleman. Remember the cost of your prejudice. And I hope, for your sake, that you use this as an opportunity to reflect, to grow, and to become a better person. The door closed behind Richard, leaving him alone in the hallway, his world forever changed. Inside the conference room, John took a deep breath, the weight of what he had just done settling on his shoulders. It was a necessary step, but only the first of many in the long journey to reshape the culture of his company and the luxury retail industry as a whole. The luxury store hummed with whispers and furtive glances as employees tried to make sense of Richard's sudden departure. The air crackled with a mixture of relief and apprehension, each staff member wondering what this abrupt change meant for their future. As John Bennett strode through the polished aisles, heads turned and conversations hushed, the weight of anticipation hanging heavy in the air. John called for an all-staff meeting, his voice carrying a quiet authority that brooked no argument. As employees gathered in the store's opulent showroom, surrounded by glittering displays of watches and jewelry, the tension was palpable. Some fidgeted nervously, while others stood tall, hope gleaming in their eyes for the first time in years. I know you all have questions, John began, his gaze sweeping across the assembled staff, and I'm here to provide answers. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Richard Coleman is no longer with the company. His actions and leadership were inconsistent with our values and the future we envision for the store. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a flurry of hushed exclamations. John held up a hand, silencing the murmurs. I understand this is shocking news, but I want you all to know that this change is just the beginning of a transformation that will make our store a beacon of inclusivity and respect in the luxury retail world. As John spoke, he could see the mix of emotions playing across the faces before him. Relief shone in the eyes of those who had suffered under Richard's discriminatory policies. Anxiety creased the brows of others who feared the unknown future that lay ahead. And in some, a spark of excitement began to grow as they contemplated the possibilities that change might bring. I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Moore, John continued, gesturing to a woman standing beside him. Sarah stepped forward, her posture radiating confidence and warmth. Sarah will be taking over as interim manager, effective immediately. Sarah surveyed the room, her gaze direct and unwavering. I'm honored to be here, she began, her voice clear and strong. And I want you all to know that my commitment to inclusivity and respect isn't just a corporate buzzword. It's the foundation upon which we'll build our future success. As Sarah outlined her vision for the store, John watched the staff closely. He saw nods of approval, tentative smiles, and a few furrowed brows of skepticism. But beneath it all, he sensed a growing current of hope, a collective realization that real change might finally be possible. We're going to implement comprehensive training programs, Sarah explained, her enthusiasm infectious. Not just cursory seminars, but ongoing education that will help us all recognize and address our biases. We'll be establishing clear policies for reporting and addressing discrimination, with real consequences for those who violate our principles. John stepped forward again, his presence commanding attention. I know change can be frightening, he acknowledged, his voice softening. But I want you all to understand the incredible opportunity we have here. We're not just changing a store, we're setting an example for the entire industry. As John outlined his vision for the future, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. The initial apprehension gave way to a cautious optimism. Employees who had long felt marginalized or overlooked found themselves leaning in, hanging on every word. Those who had been complicit in the old system shifted uncomfortably, but even they couldn't deny the power of the transformation being laid out before them. This won't be an easy journey, John cautioned, his tone serious. We'll face challenges and setbacks. There will be difficult conversations and moments of discomfort. But I believe in every single one of you, and I know that together we can create something truly extraordinary. As the meeting drew to a close, John could feel the energy in the room had transformed. The whispers were no longer fearful, but excited. Employees clustered in small groups, discussing the possibilities that lay ahead. Sarah moved among them, answering questions and offering reassurances, her presence already a stark contrast to Richard's aloof management style. John watched it all unfold, a sense of cautious satisfaction settling over him. This was just the first step on a long and challenging road, but it was a crucial one. As he prepared to leave, he overheard a conversation between two employees that made him pause. "Do you really think things can change?" one asked, her voice tinged with hope and doubt in equal measure. "I don't know," her colleague replied, "but for the first time in years, I actually want to come to work tomorrow to find out." A small smile played across John's lips as he exited the store. The seeds of change had been planted. Now it was time to nurture them and watch them grow. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the store's windows, Sarah Moore stood before her assembled staff. Determination etched on her face. The luxury boutique, once a bastion of exclusivity and prejudice, was about to embark on a transformative journey. Sarah's voice, clear and resolute, cut through the nervous energy that filled the room. "Today we begin anew," she declared, her eyes meeting those of each employee. "Our goal is not just to sell luxury items, but to create an environment of genuine inclusivity and respect." The staff shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uncertain glances. For many, this was uncharted territory, a stark departure from the discriminatory practices they had grown accustomed to under Richard's leadership. Sarah, sensing their apprehension, pressed on. "We're going to start with role-playing exercises," she explained, gesturing to the small group she had arranged. "Each of you will have the opportunity to experience different perspectives, both as customers and as staff members." As the exercises began, the tension in the room was palpable. In one corner, a young sales associate struggled to maintain her composure as she played the role of a black customer being subtly discriminated against. Her hands trembled as she confronted her own discomfort, realizing how often she had witnessed similar scenarios without intervening. Across the room, a veteran employee's face reddened as he fumbled through an interaction with a customer in a wheelchair. His clumsy attempts to offer assistance revealed deeply ingrained assumptions and biases he had never before questioned. Sarah moved among the groups, offering guidance and encouragement. She paused beside two employees engaged in a heated discussion. "I just don't see why we need to change," one was saying, his voice tinged with frustration. "We've always done fine catering to our usual clientele." Sarah interjected gently. "Consider this. By expanding our welcome to all customers, regardless of their background, we're not just doing what's right, we're also opening ourselves up to new opportunities and a broader customer base." As the days passed, Sarah worked tirelessly, addressing concerns and resistance one-on-one with staff members. She listened patiently to their fears and doubts, offering reassurance and concrete strategies for change. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere in the store began to shift. The once frosty demeanor of certain staff members thawed, replaced by genuine smiles and attentive service for all customers. The security guard, who had previously trailed customers of color, now greeted everyone with equal warmth and respect. Even the layout of the store underwent subtle changes, becoming more accessible and welcoming to customers with disabilities. As the week drew to a close, anticipation built among the staff. The true test of their new policies and training was approaching. A busy Saturday, typically one of their highest traffic days. Sarah gathered the team for a final pep talk, her confidence infectious. Remember, she said, her voice filled with quiet pride, every customer who walks through that door deserves our best. Let's show them what true luxury service looks like. The doors opened and a diverse stream of customers flowed in. The staff, initially tentative, soon found their stride. A young black couple, hesitant at first, were greeted with genuine warmth and attentive service. An elderly woman using a walker was patiently assisted without a hint of condescension. A group of exuberant teenagers, previously viewed with suspicion, were treated with respect and allowed to browse freely. As the day progressed, the energy in the store was electric. Customers left with smiles on their faces and bags in their hands, many expressing their appreciation for the exceptional service. The staff, buoyed by positive interactions, found themselves genuinely enjoying their work in a way they never had before. By closing time, exhaustion mingled with exhilaration. Sarah gathered the team, her face beaming with pride. "You've all done an incredible job," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is just the beginning of what we can achieve together." In the weeks that followed, word of the store's transformation spread rapidly. Social media buzzed with positive reviews, praising not just the luxury goods but the inclusive and welcoming atmosphere. Customers who had previously felt unwelcome or ignored now returned, bringing friends and family. Sales figures began to climb, surpassing even the most optimistic projections. But more than that, there was a newfound sense of purpose and pride among the staff. They weren't just selling luxury items. They were part of something larger, a movement towards a more inclusive and respectful retail environment. As Sarah watched the bustling store floor, filled with diverse customers being served with genuine care and attention, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The journey was far from over, but they had taken a significant step forward. In this luxury boutique, a new dawn had truly broken, illuminating a path towards a more inclusive and prosperous future. As news of the store's transformation spread like wildfire across social media platforms, the luxury retail industry found itself at a crossroads. John Bennett's bold move to confront systemic racism within his own company had ignited a fierce debate about diversity and inclusion in high-end shopping experiences. Instagram posts showcasing the store's newfound welcoming atmosphere garnered thousands of likes, while Twitter buzzed with hashtags praising the inclusive initiatives. Other luxury retailers couldn't ignore the shifting tides of public opinion. Some scrambled to assess their own practices, while others watched warily from the sidelines. The pressure to follow suit was palpable as customers began questioning the policies of other high-end boutiques. One particularly viral tweet asked, "If John Bennett's store can do it, why can't others?" Industry insiders engaged in heated discussions about the long-term impact of John's actions. Some praised his courage, hailing it as a watershed moment for the luxury sector. Others expressed skepticism, questioning whether such changes could be sustained without sacrificing the air of exclusivity that had long defined luxury shopping. A recent study by the Reputation Institute revealed the stakes at play. 70% of consumers stated they are more likely to support brands that engage in social justice initiatives, noted Dr. Emily Chen, lead researcher. High-profile incidents of discrimination have led to immediate backlash on social media, prompting companies to respond quickly to mitigate damage. As the debate raged on, John found himself inundated with invitations to share his experience and vision. Luxury brand conferences, business schools, and even TED Talks sought his insights on transforming corporate culture. John's inbox overflowed with messages from other CEOs, some seeking advice, others expressing admiration, and a few voicing their concerns about the potential risks. The transformation of John's store quickly became a case study in effective diversity management. Business professors analyzed the strategies employed, from the comprehensive staff training to the revamped customer service protocols. Sarah Moore's leadership style was scrutinized and praised for its blend of empathy and accountability. Dr. Michael Thompson, a prominent business ethics professor, commented, "What Bennett has achieved goes beyond mere policy changes. He's demonstrated that inclusivity and luxury are not mutually exclusive concepts. This case study will be taught in business schools for years to come." As the success of the transformed store became increasingly evident, John found himself pondering the next steps. The potential for expanding this approach company-wide loomed large in his mind. He spent long nights poring over reports, weighing the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. The anticipation within the company grew as rumors of a major announcement circulated. Employees at other branches wondered if similar changes were coming their way. Some embraced the possibility with enthusiasm, while others harbored concerns about the upheaval such transformations might bring. Finally, after weeks of deliberation and planning, John called a company-wide video conference. As faces filled the screens before him, representing stores across the country, John took a deep breath. "Today," he began, his voice steady and determined, "we embark on a comprehensive review of all our stores. What we've achieved in one location is just the beginning. We will ensure that every customer, in every store, experiences the same level of respect and inclusivity." The announcement sent ripples through the luxury retail industry. Competitors scrambled to assess their own practices, fearing they might be left behind in the changing landscape. Trade publications ran front-page stories analyzing the potential impact of John's decision. As the dust settled from John's announcement, the luxury retail industry found itself grappling with its long history of discrimination. Uncomfortable conversations began in boardrooms across the sector. Some brands embraced the challenge, announcing their own diversity initiatives. Others resisted, clinging to outdated notions of exclusivity. Dr. Alicia Rodriguez, a retail industry analyst, observed, "We're seeing a significant shift in the luxury sector. According to our research, 60% of luxury brands have implemented training programs focused on unconscious bias and customer service improvement in response to public pressure and social media scrutiny." As John prepared for the monumental task ahead, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and trepidation. The road ahead would be challenging, but the potential for positive change was immense. He knew that the eyes of the industry, and indeed the world, were upon him. The transformation of one store had sparked a movement, and John Bennett was determined to see it through to its conclusion. Just as the luxury store had settled into its new rhythm of inclusivity, a ghost from the past materialized at its gleaming entrance. Richard Coleman, once the picture of polished arrogance, now stood disheveled and desperate, his eyes darting nervously across the opulent showroom. Sarah Moore, the interim manager who had overseen the store's transformation, felt her heart skip a beat as she recognized the fallen manager. Without hesitation, she reached for her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she alerted John Bennett to this unexpected development. Richard's presence sent ripples of unease through the staff. Those who had suffered under his discriminatory regime tensed, old wounds threatening to reopen. Newer employees who had only heard whispers of the store's troubled past watched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. As Richard made his way towards the customer service desk, his shoulders hunched and his gait unsteady, the contrast between his current state and his former imperious demeanor was stark. "Please," Richard's voice cracked as he addressed Sarah, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I need to speak with John. I've changed. I've learned. I just need a chance to prove it." His words, once sharp and cutting, now tumbled out in a desperate jumble. Sarah regarded him with a mix of pity and caution, her training in conflict resolution kicking in as she worked to maintain a professional demeanor. The tension in the store ratcheted up as John Bennett strode through the doors, his face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. He paused for a moment, taking in the scene before him. Richard's broken figure, Sarah's protective stance, and the watchful eyes of his staff. With measured steps, John approached his former manager, the weight of their shared history hanging heavy in the air. "Richard," John's voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil he felt within. "I didn't expect to see you here." The two men faced each other, a study in contrast. John, impeccably dressed and radiating quiet confidence, stood tall against Richard's rumpled appearance and desperate energy. Richard launched into an impassioned plea, his words tumbling out in a frantic stream. "John, please. I know I made terrible mistakes. I've spent months reflecting, learning, trying to understand the harm I caused. I've taken courses on diversity and inclusion. I've volunteered at community centers. I'm not the same man I was." His voice broke as he continued. "I'm asking, begging, for a second chance. Let me prove that people can change, that I can be part of the solution." The store fell silent, every ear straining to catch John's response. Employees who had suffered under Richard's regime watched with bated breath, their own journeys of healing and growth reflected in this tense moment. John's face remained impassive as he listened, his mind racing with the implications of Richard's request. For a fleeting moment, John allowed himself to consider the possibility. The idea of redemption, of transforming a once bitter enemy into an ally in the fight against discrimination, held a certain allure. It would be a powerful statement about the possibility of change, a living example of the very principles of growth and inclusivity that the store now championed. But as quickly as the thought arose, John dismissed it. He remembered the pain in the eyes of employees who had been marginalized, the customers who had been made to feel unwelcome in a space meant to bring joy and luxury. He thought of the hard work and dedication it had taken to reshape the store's culture, to build trust with a diverse clientele. The risk of undoing all that progress was simply too great. "Richard," John began, his voice firm but not unkind, "I appreciate that you've taken steps to educate yourself and reflect on your past actions. That's commendable, but I can't in good conscience bring you back into this environment. The trust you broke, the harm you caused, it runs too deep. Our commitment to change, to creating a truly inclusive space, must be unwavering." Richard's face crumpled, the last vestiges of hope draining away. "But how can I make amends if no one will give me the chance?" he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. John placed a hand on Richard's shoulder, a gesture both comforting and final. "Your journey of growth doesn't require our forgiveness or employment, Richard. Continue your path of self-improvement. Find ways to contribute positively to your community. But it won't be here, not in this store that still bears the scars of your past actions." As Richard turned to leave, his shoulders slumped in defeat, John felt a complex mix of emotions wash over him. There was sadness for the man Richard had been, in the potential he had squandered. There was anger still simmering beneath the surface for the pain he had caused. But above all, there was a renewed sense of purpose and determination. Watching Richard's retreating figure, John reflected on the true cost of prejudice, not just to its victims, but to those who perpetrate it. It was a stark reminder of why their mission was so vital, why the work of creating a truly inclusive environment could never cease. As he turned to address his team, John's resolve hardened. They would continue to lead by example, to show the world that luxury and inclusivity were not just compatible, but essential partners in creating a better future. John Bennett's courageous stand against discrimination in his luxury store had ignited a firestorm of national attention. As news of his undercover operation and subsequent overhaul of company policies spread, it touched a nerve in a society grappling with long-standing issues of racial bias. Social media buzzed with hashtags praising John's actions, while major news outlets clamored for interviews. Civil rights organizations, sensing an opportunity to effect real change in the corporate world, reached out to John with proposals for collaboration. The NAACP and the Urban League sought his insights on implementing diversity initiatives in the retail sector. John found himself inundated with invitations to speak at conferences and participate in panel discussions on corporate responsibility. However, the spotlight also brought its share of criticism. Some voices in the media questioned why it had taken John so long to address the discrimination in his own company. Op-eds appeared, questioning whether his actions were truly altruistic or simply a calculated move to protect his brand in an increasingly socially conscious marketplace. John grappled with the implications of his newfound platform. He had never sought to become the face of corporate diversity efforts, yet he now found himself thrust into that role. Late nights were spent poring over reports, consulting with advisors, and wrestling with the weight of expectations placed upon him. As debates raged in boardrooms and on social media, John's company became a lightning rod for discussions on corporate responsibility. Industry analysts scrutinized every move, while competitors watched warily, unsure whether to follow his lead or distance themselves from the controversy. The pressure mounted as John prepared to address these concerns publicly. He knew that his words would be dissected and analyzed, potentially setting the tone for industry-wide discussions on diversity and inclusion. Sleepless nights were spent crafting and refining his message, balancing accountability with a vision for the future. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. John stood before a packed auditorium, cameras flashing as he approached the podium. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak, his voice steady and resolute. I stand before you today not as a hero, but as someone who recognized a grave injustice and chose to act, John said, his words resonating through the hushed room. I acknowledge that this action was long overdue. The fact that discrimination flourished in my own company for so long is a failure for which I take full responsibility. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. But today is not about dwelling on past failures. It's about committing to a future where luxury and inclusivity go hand in hand, where every customer, regardless of their race, gender, or background, feels valued and respected. John outlined a comprehensive plan for industry-wide change, proposing partnerships with civil rights organizations, mandatory diversity training for all employees, and transparent reporting on hiring and promotion practices. He challenged his fellow CEOs to join him in this effort, warning that those who clung to outdated discriminatory practices would soon find themselves left behind. As John's speech concluded, a palpable sense of anticipation filled the air. The luxury retail sector, long insulated from societal pressures, now faced a moment of reckoning. Some brands immediately pledged to follow John's lead, while others remained silent, their reluctance speaking volumes. In the days and weeks that followed, the ripple effects of John's commitment became evident. Industry publications ran front-page stories analyzing the potential impact of his proposals. Consumers took to social media, demanding transparency from their favorite luxury brands. Competitors scrambled to assess their own practices, fearful of being caught on the wrong side of history. John's journey from silent observer to outspoken advocate had transformed not just his company, but the entire conversation around diversity and luxury retail. As he watched the industry grapple with its long history of exclusion and bias, John felt a mix of pride and trepidation. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was committed to seeing this transformation through to its conclusion. The luxury retail sector, once a bastion of exclusivity, now stood at a crossroads. The long overdue reckoning had begun, and John Bennett found himself at the forefront of a movement that promised to reshape the industry for generations to come. As the shockwaves from John Bennett's bold stand against discrimination rippled through the luxury retail industry, a seismic shift began to take hold. Brands that had long prided themselves on exclusivity suddenly found themselves scrambling to reassess their practices, fearful of being left behind in a rapidly changing landscape. Industry-wide audits, hastily commissioned in the wake of John's revelations, painted a damning picture of systemic racial bias. High-end boutiques and designer flagship stores, once bastions of opulence and prestige, were revealed to be breeding grounds for discrimination. The polished facades and gleaming displays had masked a culture of prejudice that ran deep through the veins of luxury retail. Some brands embraced the challenge, recognizing the urgent need for change. They launched comprehensive diversity training programs, overhauled hiring practices, and made public commitments to inclusivity. These forward-thinking companies saw the writing on the wall: adapt or face irrelevance in an increasingly conscious consumer landscape. Yet not all were so quick to evolve. A handful of old-guard luxury houses dug in their heels, clinging to outdated notions of exclusivity and elitism. They dismissed John's actions as a publicity stunt, arguing that their clientele preferred a more curated shopping experience. This resistance, however, proved to be a costly miscalculation. As word spread of these brands' refusal to change, public backlash swift and severe. Social media campaigns called for boycotts, with influencers and celebrities publicly distancing themselves from the offending labels. Sales plummeted as consumers voted with their wallets, choosing to support brands that aligned with their values. Amidst this turmoil, John Bennett's company emerged as a beacon of progress. The transformation of his stores from sites of discrimination to models of inclusivity caught the attention of industry leaders and consumers alike. Sales soared as a diverse clientele, long alienated by the luxury sector, found a welcoming home for their high-end purchases. Competitors, watching John's success with a mixture of admiration and envy, began to seek his counsel. The man who had once been viewed as an industry outsider now found himself inundated with requests for advice and collaboration. John's inbox overflowed with messages from CEOs and brand directors, all eager to learn the secrets of his inclusive approach to luxury retail. As more and more brands adopted John's philosophy, a palpable sense of anticipation began to build within the industry. Trade publications buzzed with speculation about a potential tipping point, a moment when inclusive practices would become the norm rather than the exception in luxury retail. That moment arrived sooner than many had expected. At a high-profile industry summit, a coalition of leading luxury brands made a groundbreaking announcement. They unveiled a set of new standards for diversity and inclusion, pledging to implement them across their global operations. The guidelines covered everything from hiring practices and employee training to marketing campaigns and in-store experiences. The face of luxury retail began to transform before the public's eyes. Store windows that had once showcased a narrow ideal of beauty now featured models of diverse backgrounds. Sales floors became melting pots of cultures and experiences, with staff as varied as the clientele they served. The very notion of luxury itself was being redefined, expanding to embrace a wider range of perspectives and aesthetics. As John watched these changes unfold, he felt a complex mix of emotions. There was pride in the role he had played in catalyzing this transformation, tempered by the sobering knowledge of how much work still lay ahead. The road to true equality and inclusion would be long and fraught with challenges. Yet as he looked out over the changing landscape of luxury retail, John couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The industry that had once been a symbol of exclusivity and elitism was evolving into something more inclusive, more representative of the diverse world it served. It was a transformation that held the promise of a brighter, more equitable future, not just for luxury retail, but for society as a whole. The anticipation in the air was palpable as Sarah Moore surveyed the transformed luxury store. Tonight's customer appreciation event would be the ultimate test of their new inclusive policies. A diverse crowd gathered outside, their excited chatter drifting through the glass doors. Among them were faces Sarah recognized, customers who had once felt unwelcome, now returning with cautious hope. As the doors opened, the store came alive with a vibrant energy. Staff members, their training fresh in their minds, moved through the crowd with genuine warmth and attentiveness. Sarah watched closely, her heart swelling with pride as she witnessed the fruits of their hard work. A young sales associate deftly assisted a customer in a wheelchair, ensuring they could comfortably browse the displays. Nearby, another team member engaged in animated conversation with a group of teenagers, treating them with the same respect afforded to their wealthiest clients. Amidst the throng, a casually dressed man moved through the store, observing the interactions with keen interest. Few would have recognized John Bennett in his inconspicuous attire, but his eyes missed nothing as he took in the scene before him. He paused near a display of watches, listening intently to a conversation between a customer and a staff member. "I never thought I'd feel comfortable in a place like this," the customer confided, her fingers tracing the edge of a gleaming display case. "Last time I came in, the security guard followed me around like I was going to steal something." The sales associate's face fell, a mix of shame and determination crossing her features. "I'm so sorry you experienced that," she replied earnestly. "We're committed to ensuring that never happens again. Everyone deserves to feel welcome here." As the evening progressed, more stories emerged. A middle-aged black man recounted how he'd been ignored by staff on previous visits, assumed to be unable to afford the luxury items. An elderly woman shared her frustration at being patronized and rushed through her shopping experience. Each tale was met with genuine empathy and assurances of change. The atmosphere in the store grew charged with emotion as customers and staff alike grappled with the weight of past injustices and the hope for a better future. Sarah felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to find John, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's time," he said softly. John made his way to the center of the store, clearing his throat to gain attention. As recognition dawned on the faces around him, a hush fell over the crowd. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. for giving us the opportunity to show you the changes we've made." He paused, taking in the sea of diverse faces before him. This store, like many in the luxury retail industry, has a history we're not proud of. We've excluded, discriminated, and made many of you feel unwelcome. For that, I am deeply sorry. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as John continued. But tonight isn't just about apologizing. It's about showing you our commitment to change, to creating a space where everyone is valued and respected. As John spoke of the journey they'd undertaken, of the hard work and dedication of the staff, Sarah noticed tears in the eyes of both customers and employees. The raw honesty of his words struck a chord, breaking down barriers and fostering a sense of shared purpose. "This transformation isn't just about business," John concluded, his voice thick with emotion. "It's about recognizing the humanity in each person who walks through our doors. It's about building a community where luxury isn't defined by exclusivity, but by the way we treat each other." As applause filled the store, Sarah realized that something profound had shifted. The luxury boutique, once a symbol of elitism and discrimination, had become a beacon of progress and inclusivity. Customers lingered long after the event's scheduled end, sharing stories and forging connections. The store hummed with a new energy, one of hope and possibility. As the last guest departed, Sarah caught John's eye across the room. They shared a smile, both understanding that this was just the beginning. The real work of maintaining and expanding this inclusive environment lay ahead. But for tonight, they could bask in the knowledge that they had taken a significant step towards a more equitable future in luxury retail. John Bennett's courageous stand against discrimination in his luxury store sent shockwaves through the corporate world. As news of his undercover operation and subsequent transformation of company culture spread, other CEOs found themselves compelled to take a hard look at their own organizations. A trend of inclusivity audits began to sweep through various industries, from tech giants to manufacturing firms. These audits, inspired by John's approach, involved executives going undercover within their own companies to experience firsthand the realities faced by employees and customers. The results were often eye-opening and uncomfortable. CEOs who had long prided themselves on running progressive organizations were confronted with stark evidence of systemic biases and discriminatory practices. At a major tech company in Silicon Valley, the CEO discovered a pervasive culture of ageism that had been pushing out experienced employees in favor of younger, cheaper talent. A retail chain uncovered widespread gender discrimination in its promotion practices, with women consistently passed over for management positions despite superior qualifications. As these uncomfortable truths came to light, many business leaders turned to John for guidance. His phone rang constantly with calls from CEOs seeking advice on implementing meaningful change. John found himself thrust into the role of consultant and mentor, sharing the lessons he had learned during his own company's transformation. In boardrooms across the country, John's words resonated. True change requires more than just policy updates. It demands a fundamental shift in culture, starting from the top down. He emphasized the importance of comprehensive training programs, clear accountability measures, and a genuine commitment to fostering an inclusive environment. The media, captivated by the ripple effect of John's actions, continued to follow his story closely. News outlets ran feature articles tracking the impact of his initiative, highlighting both the successes and the challenges faced by companies undergoing similar transformations. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Number Inclusivity Matters and Number CEOs Undercover, as the conversation around corporate responsibility and diversity gained momentum. As the movement grew, anticipation began to build for an upcoming national conference on corporate inclusivity. Industry leaders, diversity experts, and civil rights advocates would gather to discuss strategies for creating more equitable workplaces. At the center of it all was John Bennett, slated to deliver the keynote address. In the days leading up to the conference, John spent long hours refining his speech. He knew that his words would carry weight, potentially shaping the direction of corporate America's approach to inclusivity for years to come. The pressure was immense, but John drew strength from the knowledge that his experience could serve as a catalyst for broader societal change. As John took the stage, a hush fell over the packed auditorium. Cameras flashed and pens hovered over notepads as he began to speak. My journey began with a moment of painful realization, he said, his voice steady and resolute. I had built a company that I believed embodied the principles of equality and respect, only to discover that discrimination had taken root right under my nose. John went on to recount his undercover experience, the difficult decisions he had to make, and the transformative process his company had undergone. He spoke of the challenges they had faced and the victories they had achieved. But more importantly, he emphasized that their work was far from over. This is not just about making our companies more diverse or inclusive, John declared, his words resonating through the hall. It's about recognizing that our businesses have the power and the responsibility to shape society. Every policy we implement, every hire we make, every customer we serve, these actions ripple outward, influencing communities and changing lives. As John concluded his speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation. His words had struck a chord, igniting a sense of purpose and possibility among the assembled leaders. In that moment, it became clear that John's experience had indeed become a catalyst for a broader societal conversation. In the weeks and months that followed, the impact of the conference and John's keynote address continued to reverberate through corporate America. More companies launched their own inclusivity initiatives, and conversations about diversity and equity became commonplace in boardrooms and break rooms alike. John's journey, which had begun with a single undercover visit to his own store, had set in motion a movement that promised to reshape the very fabric of American business culture. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the store's windows, John Bennett found himself standing outside the luxury boutique that had sparked a revolution in corporate America. 1 year had passed since his undercover mission exposed the systemic racism within his own company, and now he returned, incognito once more, to witness the fruits of their labor. The atmosphere inside the store was a stark contrast to what John had experienced 12 months ago. Gone was the cold, intimidating aura that had once permeated the air. In its place, a warm, vibrant energy greeted customers as they stepped through the doors. John watched as a diverse array of shoppers browsed the gleaming displays, each treated with the same level of respect and attention. Moving through the store, John observed the staff's interactions with keen interest. A young black couple examining an exquisite watch was approached by a sales associate who offered assistance without a hint of the suspicion that had once been commonplace. An elderly woman using a walker was patiently guided through the jewelry section, the employee's genuine smile never wavering as she took her time deciding. John's heart swelled with pride as he witnessed Sarah Moore, the interim manager he had appointed, deftly handling a customer's complaint. Her leadership style, a perfect blend of empathy and professionalism, had clearly set the tone for the entire staff. Under her guidance, the store had not only embraced inclusivity, but had become a model for the entire company. As he continued his covert observation, John noticed subtle yet significant changes in the store's layout and policies. The security presence, once overbearing and discriminatory, was now discreet and respectful. Display cases that had once been closely guarded were now open and accessible, a testament to the trust that had been built between staff and customers. The success of this transformation was evident in more than just the atmosphere. Sales figures had soared, exceeding even the most optimistic projections. The store had become a beacon of inclusive luxury, attracting a diverse clientele that had long felt unwelcome in high-end retail spaces. As closing time approached, John felt a growing anticipation. He had planned this visit carefully, wanting to witness a full day of operations before revealing himself. Now, as the last customers made their purchases and filed out, he knew the moment had arrived. Slipping into the back office, John quickly changed into his usual attire. He emerged just as Sarah was gathering the staff for their end-of-day meeting. The look of shock on their faces as they recognized him was quickly replaced by smiles of welcome and pride. "I hope you'll forgive my little subterfuge," John began, his voice warm with emotion. "I wanted to see for myself how far we've come, and I must say, I'm overwhelmed by what I've witnessed today." He went on to praise their transformation, highlighting specific interactions he had observed throughout the day. The staff listened intently, their faces beaming with a mix of pride and determination. "What you've accomplished here is nothing short of remarkable," John continued. You've proven that luxury and inclusivity are not just compatible, but essential partners in creating a truly exceptional retail experience. As John's words sank in, a palpable sense of celebration filled the air. Staff members shared stories of their own growth and learning over the past year, each anecdote a testament to the profound change that had taken place. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Mr. Bennett, when you first appointed me to this position, I was terrified. I knew the challenge ahead of us was immense. But standing here today, seeing how far we've come, it's beyond anything I could have imagined. The group erupted in applause, the sound of their cheers echoing through the now empty store. As John looked around at the faces of his employees, he saw not just pride in their accomplishments, but a fierce determination to continue pushing forward. This is just the beginning, John declared, his voice ringing with conviction. What we've achieved here will serve as a blueprint for change across our entire company, and hopefully for the industry as a whole. Together, we're creating a future where luxury truly is for everyone. As the impromptu celebration continued, John felt a profound sense of hope. The journey had been challenging, fraught with difficult decisions and painful realizations. But standing in this transformed space, surrounded by a team committed to inclusivity and respect, he knew that every struggle had been worth it. The luxury retail industry would never be the same, and John Bennett was proud to be at the forefront of that change. John Bennett stood at the window of his office, gazing out at the bustling city below. The view had changed little in the years since his undercover experience, but the man looking out had been transformed. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, knowing that the work he had begun was far from over. As he turned back to his desk, John's eyes fell on a stack of reports detailing the progress made across his company. The numbers were encouraging: increased diversity in hiring, improved customer satisfaction scores, and a significant uptick in sales. Yet he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was still so much more to be done. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Bennett, your 2 o'clock is here," his assistant announced. John took a deep breath, steeling himself for the meeting ahead. It was time to address the new challenges that had arisen as the company expanded its inclusive practices. As he made his way to the conference room, John reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The shock of discovering discrimination in his own stores, the difficult decisions he had to make, and the transformative power of confronting prejudice head-on. Each step had been a lesson, shaping his understanding of what true inclusivity meant in the world of luxury retail. The meeting was intense, filled with passionate discussions about the next phase of their diversity initiatives. New stores were opening in different markets, each with its own unique cultural dynamics. Some executives argued for a standardized approach, while others pushed for more localized strategies. John listened intently, knowing that the decisions made here would shape the company's future. As the meeting concluded, John announced his decision to continue his practice of undercover visits. Regular undercover visits by leadership can help maintain accountability and ensure that the values of inclusivity are being upheld throughout the organization, he declared, his voice firm with conviction. The room fell silent, a mix of surprise and respect evident on the faces around him. Later that evening, as John prepared to leave the office, he paused to consider the state of the luxury retail industry. Much had changed in the wake of his company's transformation. Competitor brands had scrambled to implement their own diversity initiatives, and industry publications were filled with articles about inclusive luxury. Yet pockets of resistance remained, clinging to outdated notions of exclusivity and elitism. John's mind raced with possibilities for his next move. The changes he had implemented in his company were significant, but he yearned to make a broader impact. As he drove home, an idea began to take shape: a foundation dedicated to promoting inclusivity in business, not just in luxury retail, but across all sectors. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as John worked to bring his vision to life. He assembled a team of experts in diversity and inclusion, reaching out to civil rights organizations and business leaders alike. The foundation would provide resources, training, and support to companies looking to create more inclusive environments. As news of the foundation spread, John found himself inundated with messages of support and requests for collaboration. He knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but the enthusiasm he encountered fueled his determination. This was more than just a business initiative. It was a movement that had the potential to reshape corporate America. On the day of the foundation's launch, John stood before a crowd of journalists, business leaders, and activists. His voice steady and filled with passion, he outlined his vision for a more inclusive future. The success of inclusivity initiatives can be measured through employee feedback and customer satisfaction surveys, he explained, emphasizing the importance of ongoing assessment and improvement. As he concluded his speech, John felt a sense of hope and purpose wash over him. The journey that had begun with a single undercover visit to his store had become a blueprint for creating lasting change. He knew that there would be obstacles ahead, that the fight against prejudice was ongoing. But standing there, surrounded by people committed to making a difference, John Bennett felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. John Bennett's journey from luxury store owner to champion of inclusivity serves as a powerful reminder that one person's courage can spark industry-wide transformation. His willingness to confront uncomfortable truths and take decisive action rippled far beyond his own company, challenging long-held prejudices in the world of high-end retail. The fight against discrimination is far from over, but John's story offers hope and a roadmap for change. It calls on each of us to examine our own spheres of influence, to question ingrained biases, and to take a stand against injustice wherever we encounter it. Whether in our workplaces, communities, or personal relationships, we all have the power to challenge discrimination and foster inclusivity. As we reflect on John's journey, we're reminded that progress is possible through both individual acts of bravery and collective commitment to change. The road ahead may be long and fraught with challenges, but with determination and unity, we can create a world where respect and equality are not luxuries, but fundamental rights afforded to all.